Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the life you've been living, the victories, the pleasures, the desires you've pursued, was not truly your own. Imagine the chilling possibility that what you thought was strength has been carefully manufactured weakness. That every indulgence you congratulated yourself for, every comfort you clung to, every moment of pleasure you chased, was not a testament to your freedom, but proof of your silent slavery. Strange, isn't it? To think that the very things that make you feel alive could be the forces quietly draining your vitality. To suspect that what you call pleasure might not be a gift, but a curse. What if your daily habits, the way you eat, the way you consume entertainment, the way you soothe yourself when restless, were not small, harmless indulgences, but slow poisons that erode the very core of your masculinity? This is the paradox. Men today believe they are freer than ever before. You can order food with a click, summon a partner with a swipe, numb your anxiety with a pill, silence boredom with endless scrolling, flood your senses with dopamine on demand. On the surface, it feels like liberation, like mastery of your environment. Yet Nietzsche warned us long ago, the easier the pleasure, the deeper the enslavement. Because here's the terrifying truth. Strength is forged in resistance, not in indulgence. Pleasure is supposed to be earned, a byproduct of struggle and triumph. But when it becomes the goal, when you arrange your entire life around comfort and ease, your spirit begins to rot. You may not see it immediately. The decay is subtle, silent. It hides behind laughter, behind the false glow of satisfaction. But beneath it all, something essential to your being is withering. Ask yourself, why do so many men, in the prime of their lives, feel hollow? Why do they collapse into apathy despite having more opportunities and luxuries than all the kings of history combined? Why does the modern man, who can indulge in any pleasure he desires, wake up each morning with a vague heaviness in his chest, a sense that something invisible has been stolen from him? The answer is brutal, but it is there. You are not the master of your pleasures. They are the master of you. Nietzsche called this the sickness of modernity, the hidden disease of decadence. It is not hunger that kills a man, but excess. Not pain, but comfort. Not discipline, but the endless erosion of discipline under the flood of stimulation. The problem is not that men lack access to pleasure. The problem is that they are drowning in it, unable to distinguish between what strengthens them and what slowly dismantles them. Look closer at your own life. When was the last time you denied yourself something? When was the last time you said no, not out of necessity, but out of strength? When did you last let hunger sharpen your focus instead of rushing to quiet it? When did you last face boredom without reaching for a screen or desire without instantly feeding it? You see, this is the cruel joke. Pleasure feels like power, but it is power inverted. Every time you give in without resistance, you chip away at your will. Every time you choose the easy path, you reinforce the chain around your spirit. You may laugh, you may smile, you may feel good in the moment, but deep down, your strength is leaking away, drop by drop. And here lies the great question. Is the modern man living, or is he merely being entertained to death? Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when the why is replaced by 1,000 tiny pleasures? What happens when you no longer endure suffering for a higher purpose, but instead design your life to avoid suffering altogether? The answer is not liberation. The answer is emasculation. This is the hidden pleasure that destroys you. It is not one specific vice, not one particular addiction. It is the mindset, the quiet agreement you make each day that comfort is preferable to struggle, that pleasure is preferable to meaning. That is how masculinity dies. Not with violence, not with tragedy, but with a slow drip of indulgence, so subtle that you only notice when your strength is already gone. So I ask you, if everything you've been told about happiness and pleasure is a lie, if your very instincts are being manipulated to keep you weak, then what remains? What, if anything, can awaken you from this dream of comfort before it devours your soul? The answer is hidden in places you do not wish to look. And to uncover it, we must go deeper, into the psychology of weakness, into the philosophy of decadence, into the very roots of why men surrender to pleasure and call it freedom. You might believe your choices are entirely your own, that you, in your independence, chart the course of your life. Yet pause for a moment and ask, who really decides what you want? Who plants the seed of desire in your mind before you even notice it growing? Carl Jung once warned that modern man suffers not from too little freedom, but from too much unconsciousness. He argued that the desires most men chase are not truly their own, but archetypal shadows, collective drives that society exploits without us ever realizing it. And Nietzsche, in his fiery disdain, named this condition for what it is: decadence, the slow corruption of the will, the surrender of vitality to forces that promise pleasure but demand obedience. The hidden problem is this: pleasure itself is not destructive. The danger arises when pleasure becomes detached from meaning. Pleasure was once the reward for effort, the natural echo of discipline and conquest. The hunter feasted after the kill, the warrior celebrated as. After battle, the craftsman rejoiced after long hours of shaping his work. Pleasure was rooted in reality. It was tied to something earned. But today, pleasure has been uprooted. It no longer waits patiently at the end of struggle. It is delivered instantly, endlessly, and without cost. The dopamine systems in your brain, once finely tuned to reward survival behaviors, are now hijacked by machines, by algorithms, by corporations who profit from your weakness. You don't need to hunt for food. You need only tap your phone. You don't need to face rejection in pursuit of love. You need only swipe right. You don't need to confront the abyss of boredom. You have infinite entertainment in your pocket. This is not freedom. This is conditioning. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard once remarked that in modernity, signs replace reality. Men are no longer living. They are consuming simulations of life. You watch videos of men conquering challenges instead of conquering your own. You play games where you achieve victories you will never taste in reality. You scroll through endless images of beauty that leave you with the illusion of abundance, while real intimacy slips further away. The result? You grow comfortable in the shadow of existence, convinced you are living while in truth, you are only watching yourself live. Nietzsche despised this tendency. To him, it was a symptom of what he called the last man, a creature who avoids struggle, who clings to comfort, who sneers at greatness, because greatness would demand too much of him. The last man seeks nothing beyond his own small satisfactions. He lives long, he avoids risk, and he dies without ever having lived. But here's the darker truth. This condition does not arise by accident. It has psychological roots as deep as it has philosophical ones. From a psychological perspective, your brain is wired for efficiency. It will always choose the path of least resistance. Why run when you can walk? Why walk when you can sit? Why strive when you can be entertained? Left unchecked, your mind becomes a servant to this principle of comfort. Pleasure, easily accessed, becomes the shortcut to silence your anxiety, your boredom, your hunger for meaning. Yet every time you silence that hunger, you are numbing the very signal that was meant to awaken you. Hunger is not an enemy, it is an invitation to grow stronger. Boredom is not a void, it is the space in which creativity stirs. Desire is not a curse, it is the compass of your becoming. But when you replace these raw human experiences with pre-packaged stimulation, you train yourself to avoid the very forces that make you alive. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi camps, once said that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. But what happens to the man who avoids all suffering? He also avoids meaning. And in this avoidance, he builds a prison far stronger than iron. He becomes what Nietzsche feared, a man enslaved not by tyrants, but by his own comforts. Think of it like this: a muscle that is never strained atrophies, a will that is never tested dissolves, a spirit that is never confronted with resistance becomes fragile, incapable of bearing the weight of life. And fragility is the hidden enemy of masculinity. The man who cannot endure discomfort is not free. He is a slave to every temptation that crosses his path. This is the hidden psychological and philosophical root of the problem. The system of modernity thrives on your weakness. It feeds you infinite comforts because a weak man is predictable, compliant, and profitable. A man addicted to his screen will never revolt. A man seduced by endless entertainment will never build. A Mars, and satisfied with shallow pleasures, will never seek transcendence. And here lies the cruel irony. You believe you are choosing your pleasures, but your pleasures have been chosen for you. Your instincts, once sharpened for survival, have been hacked. Your masculinity, your drive to struggle, to conquer, to endure, has been repurposed into a marketable weakness. You think you are exercising freedom when in truth you are reinforcing the cage. So ask yourself, who benefits from your weakness? Who gains when you spend your evenings drowning in artificial satisfaction instead of building your strength, your mind, your vision? Who profits from the slow disintegration of your willpower? It is here, at the intersection of psychology and philosophy, that the true horror reveals itself. You are not simply indulging in harmless pleasures. You are being reprogrammed. Every indulgence deepens the groove in your brain that says, struggle is unnecessary, resistance is pointless, comfort is life. And the longer you repeat this, the more you forget that once, long ago, you were meant to be dangerous, vital, and free. But freedom requires rebellion. It requires facing the unbearable thought that the pleasures you worship are the very chains that bind you. And yet to accept this truth is terrifying, because if you admit it, then you must also admit that everything you thought made you happy has been hollowing you out from the inside. So the question becomes, if this hidden problem has infected not just society, but your very instincts, then what is the true cost? How far does this weakness reach, and what unseen consequences does it cast over your life, your relationships, your future? That is where we must go next. You do not notice the rot while it is happening. That is the cruelest part. The decay does not announce itself with a scream, but with a whisper. It creeps silently into you. A posture, into your habits, into your very sense of self. One day you wake up and wonder when you became so tired, so unfocused, so apathetic. But by then, the erosion has already taken place. What are these consequences? They are subtle, invisible, and devastating. Let's draw them into the light. The erosion of willpower. Every indulgence weakens the will. Every time you surrender to a pleasure without resistance, you reinforce the neural pathways of passivity. Your brain learns, desire appears, desire is instantly satisfied. The consequence? You no longer know how to endure the tension between want and action. You no longer know how to hold yourself in the fire of restraint. Over time, this reshapes you. Small challenges feel unbearable. Minor discomfort feels like injustice. You begin to confuse weakness for sensitivity and fragility for virtue. And when real adversity comes, and it will, you find yourself unequipped, trembling before the weight of reality. Nietzsche despised this condition. He believed the highest act of strength was to affirm life in its fullness, not merely the sweet, but also the bitter. To embrace suffering as necessary for growth. But when a man flees every sting of suffering, he flees life itself. He becomes, in Nietzsche's biting words, the last man, the one who blinks, who smirks, who avoids every risk and calls it wisdom. The hollowing of relationships. Consider what happens to your connections with others when your will is weakened. Pleasure-trained men approach relationships not as bonds of struggle and growth, but as markets of gratification. Women are not encountered as mysteries to be honored, challenged, and understood. They become objects to be consumed. Friendships are not forged in hardship, but sustained by convenience. Slowly, all human ties become transactional. You are with others as long as they feed your comfort. You withdraw when they demand more of you. Commitment, sacrifice, endurance. Love itself becomes fragile, unable to withstand boredom, conflict, or delay. The tragic irony? By chasing endless pleasure, you destroy the very capacity for intimacy. You cannot love another deeply when you cannot first endure discomfort within yourself. Arthur Schopenhauer, bitter though he was, touched on this truth. Desire is endless, and every satisfaction is temporary. The man who builds his life around pleasure will never rest. He will move from one indulgence to another, mistaking variety for fulfillment. until the day comes when he realizes he has known everything except meaning. The corruption of purpose. But perhaps the greatest unseen consequence is the loss of purpose. Pleasure, when detached from effort, numbs the call of higher goals. It whispers, "Why strive? Why sweat? Why dream?" And because the whisper comes wrapped in sweetness, you believe it. You let your ambitions shrink. You convince yourself that small comforts are enough. Nietzsche warned of this with a parable. Man is a rope stretched between beast and overman, a bridge, not an end. To live only for pleasure is to sit down halfway across the bridge and never move again. You remain suspended in mediocrity, neither beastly nor transcendent, lulled into stagnation by your own satisfaction. The tragedy is not that you fail to reach greatness. It is that you no longer even desire it. The fire inside you dims until you forget it was ever there. The cultural mirror. Now, step back and look beyond yourself. What happens when millions of men fall into this pattern? Entire societies weaken. Strength is ridiculed, discipline dismissed, sacrifice mocked. Entertainment replaces philosophy. Consumption replaces creation. Heroes are replaced by influencers, and the crowd worships not those who suffer for truth, but those who market distraction most effectively. This is no accident. Societies benefit from docile men. A man consumed by his own addictions will not rebel, will not demand truth, will not challenge power. He will scroll, consume, purchase, obey. Pleasure becomes the perfect sedative, the invisible leash that needs no chains. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World. The future would not be controlled by pain, but by pleasure. Not by tyrants with whips, but by systems that flood the senses with comfort until no one remembers freedom. That world is no longer fiction. It is the air you breathe. The crisis of masculinity. At its core, masculinity is not about dominance or conquest. It is about bearing weight, to hold responsibility without collapsing, to endure pain for the sake of those you protect, to carry the burden of existence and still move forward. But when pleasure erodes this capacity, masculinity dissolves. The unseen consequence is this: generations of men who are strong only in image, never in essence. Men who look the part but crumble at the first test of will. Men who talk of freedom but are bound by invisible chains. Men who have mistaken pleasure for purpose, and in doing so have abandoned the very ground of their being. And the tragedy is that this weakness does not announce itself. You still smile, you still laugh, you still tell yourself that you are living well. But late at night in the silence, the question gnaws at you. Is this all I am? Is this all life has to offer? That voice, the one you silence with another drink, another show, another distraction, is the faint echo of your buried self. The part of you that remembers you were meant for more. The part Nietzsche called the will to power, the inner drive to transcend, to rise, to create meaning, even in the face of suffering. But here's the paradox. To reclaim that strength, you must first confront the weight of your decay. You must face without denial the full scope of what has been lost. Only then can rebellion begin. And that is where we must go next, into the act of rebellion itself. What would it mean to fight back against this hidden enemy, to turn against pleasure's slow poison, and to reforge your masculinity in fire? Rebellion does not begin with violence, nor with shouting slogans in the streets. It begins in the silence of your own heart, when you finally whisper to yourself, "Enough." Enough of living like a puppet whose strings are pulled by every fleeting desire. Enough of bowing to pleasures that leave you emptier with each indulgence. Enough of pretending that comfort is life. Rebellion begins the moment you admit that you have been enslaved, and that you will no longer accept it. But how do you fight an enemy that hides in every corner of your life, that lurks in your devices, in your food, in your very instincts? How do you resist something so subtle, so sweet, that the entire world encourages you to surrender to it? The answer, paradoxically, is not to destroy pleasure, but to redefine your relationship with it. You must turn it back into what it was meant to be, a reward for conquest, not the conquest itself. Discipline as defiance. The first weapon in rebellion is discipline. Not the sterile, joyless discipline of routine, but the fierce discipline of freedom. The discipline that says, I am stronger than my impulses. I choose when to indulge. I choose when to abstain. Every time you deny yourself an easy pleasure, you sharpen your will. When you feel hunger and resist, you teach yourself endurance. When you feel the itch to check your screen and instead sit with the silence, you reclaim your attention. When you face desire and do not bow instantly, you prove to yourself that you are not a slave. Nietzsche wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." To obey yourself means to command yourself, to say no when it matters most, and to honor that command even when no one is watching. This is rebellion. Not to seek a life without pleasure, but to seize mastery over pleasure so that it no longer masters you. The embrace of suffering, yet discipline alone is not enough. To truly break free, you must reverse the conditioning of modernity. You must learn again to embrace suffering, to seek out the very discomfort you have been taught to flee. Cold showers, fasting, silence, strenuous exercise, solitude, these are not merely self-help tricks. They are acts of revolt. They are ways of reminding your nervous system that pain is not the enemy, that struggle is not death, that discomfort is not catastrophe. In these moments, you rediscover what Nietzsche called amor fati, the love of fate, the radical acceptance of life as it is, bitter and sweet alike. The modern world tells you to anesthetize every pain. Rebellion demands you feel it fully, because pain, endured consciously, is not weakness, it is the forge of strength. Reclaiming purpose, but rebellion cannot stop at mere abstinence. A man who only denies himself is still defined by what he resists. To truly rise, you must rediscover a higher purpose, something that calls you beyond comfort, something worth suffering for. Viktor Frankl put it simply, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Without a why, all your sacrifices become empty. With a why, even your suffering becomes sacred. So ask yourself, what weight are you willing to carry? What vision demands your endurance? For some, it will be the creation of art, the pursuit of knowledge, the building of a family, the defense of truth. For others, it will be the struggle for justice, the forging of a business, or the conquest of their own body and mind. It does not matter what form your purpose takes. What matters is that it is larger than your comforts, that it demands you rise each morning with fire in your veins, not merely to survive, but to become. Rebellion in daily life. Rebellion, then, is lived not in grand gestures, but in small, relentless choices. To wake early when every cell in your body cries for sleep. To finish the work you promised yourself when distraction seduces you. To look people in the eyes when shame tempts you to look away. To carry yourself with dignity, even when the world mocks you. These are not glamorous acts. They will not earn applause. But each one is a declaration of war against decadence. Each one is a vote for your future self over your present weakness. The warrior's stance, to rebel, is to become a warrior, not necessarily with weapons, but with presence. The warrior is not defined by aggression, but by readiness. He stands firm in a world that wavers. He holds his ground against storms of temptation. He lives by a code, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Nietzsche admired the ancient Greeks for this spirit. Their tragedies were filled with heroes who faced unbearable suffering, not because they hoped for rescue, but because they believed dignity lay in the struggle itself. To rebel today is to revive that spirit, to say, I will carry my suffering with pride. I will not flee from it, but through it I will become. The contagion of rebellion, and here lies the hidden power. Rebellion is contagious. When one man refuses to bow to pleasure, others see it. When one man carries himself with discipline and purpose, he awakens something dormant in those around him. He reminds them that masculinity is not dead, that strength is still possible, that freedom is still within reach. Society wants you docile because docility spreads, but strength spreads too. Or the man who rebels becomes a mirror for others. He does not need to preach. His very life becomes the sermon, the price of rebellion. But do not be deceived. Rebellion has a price. To deny yourself comforts will invite ridicule. To embrace suffering will earn you misunderstanding. To pursue purpose will separate you from those who still sleep in the haze of indulgence. You will be called extreme. You will be mocked as outdated. You will be resented for refusing what others cannot resist. But remember this: every rebel in history has been misunderstood. Every creator, every philosopher, every warrior who dared to rise above the crowd was first scorned before he was remembered. The question then is not whether rebellion is difficult. The question is whether slavery to pleasure is acceptable. And once you see the truth of your chains, can you ever again pretend to be free? Rebellion is not optional. It is the only way forward. And yet, rebellion is only the beginning. Once you have broken free, once you have embraced discipline, suffering, and purpose, there remains one final step: to grasp the ultimate truth. A truth so profound that it redefines not just masculinity, but existence itself. That is where we must now turn. There comes a point when rebellion is no longer about saying no to pleasure, or even about saying yes to discipline. Those are only the opening moves. The true battle lies deeper, in how you see existence itself. Because if you still believe life is something to endure only for the sake of avoiding decay, then you are not free. You are merely surviving. The final realization is this: life is not a problem to be solved, nor a prison to escape, but a reality to be affirmed, even in its suffering. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of fate. Not just the acceptance of pain, but the radical embrace of it. To say, yes, even this, even the suffering, even the loss, even the struggle, I will it, I choose it. This is the ultimate rebellion, not merely resisting pleasure, but transforming suffering into joy. Not begrudging life's hardships, but affirming them so deeply that you would live them again, over and over, eternally. The test of eternal return. Nietzsche once posed a terrifying question. What if a demon whispered in your ear, saying you must live this life again and again for eternity, every joy, every pain, every mistake, every triumph? Would you curse the demon, or would you bless him? This is the ultimate test of your spirit. The man enslaved by pleasure would curse the demon because his life, shallow and empty, is not worth repeating. But the man who has embraced suffering, who has carved meaning out of pain, who has lived not for comfort but for greatness, he would welcome the eternal return. He would say, yes, let it come again, I choose it. And that, Nietzsche insists, is the measure of true strength, not the avoidance of suffering, but the ability to affirm life so fully that you would live it eternally without alteration. The redefinition of masculinity. At this point, masculinity reveals its deepest truth. It was never about external dominance. It was never about control over others. It was always about this inner capacity to affirm life, to stand face to face with existence in all its cruelty and beauty, and to say, I will it still. Masculinity, at its highest, is not fragile strength built on comfort. It is enduring strength forged in the fire of reality itself. It is the willingness to suffer consciously, to take responsibility willingly, to affirm fate joyfully. This is the freedom modernity cannot sell you, because it cannot be bought. It is not manufactured. It cannot be downloaded, consumed, or packaged. It must be lived. It must be suffered. It must be chosen. The sacred paradox of pleasure. And here is the paradox. When you embrace suffering, when you no longer chase pleasure, when you no longer avoid pain, pleasure returns to you purified. It is no longer an addiction, no longer a sedative. It becomes what it was meant to be, a byproduct of struggle, a moment of sweetness earned by endurance. The meal after a fast tastes divine. The warmth after cold feels holy. The laughter after hardship carries depth. This is real pleasure, pleasure that strengthens, not weakens. Pleasure that roots you deeper in life instead of numbing you to it. In affirming suffering, you redeem pleasure. the death of fear. When this truth takes root in you, something extraordinary happens. Fear dissolves. You no longer dread pain because you see it as necessary. You no longer fear loss because you have learned to embrace impermanence. You no longer cling to comfort because you have tasted something greater. You stand differently. You walk differently. You become dangerous again, not because you dominate others, but because nothing dominates you. You cannot be bribed by shallow pleasures. You cannot be controlled by threats of discomfort. You are free. And freedom, true freedom, is terrifying to those who remain enslaved. They will mock you, resent you, even fear you, but in secret, they will envy you. For you have done what they have not. You have faced existence and said yes. The echo of eternity. At the end of this journey, you realize that the secret pleasure that destroys masculinity was never about food, sex, entertainment, or distraction. It was about the mindset that sought comfort above meaning, ease above purpose, avoidance above affirmation. You see now that life was never supposed to be easy. It was supposed to break you and build you over and over until you became unbreakable. The ultimate truth is not that suffering should be avoided, but that suffering is the path to transcendence. Nietzsche's vision of the overman, the one who rises beyond the last man, is not a fantasy. It is a possibility here and now for any man who dares to affirm life fully. For any man who dares to look at his chains of pleasure, break them, and step into the storm willingly. The cinematic coda, inclusion. So imagine yourself years from now, standing at the edge of your life. The crowd around you has lived for comfort. Their faces are lined with regret. Their eyes are heavy with wasted time. And you stand differently, weathered, scarred, perhaps even broken in body, but unbroken in spirit. Because you chose to live, because you bore suffering with dignity, because you embraced fate, and in doing so, became fate. When the demon whispers to you, promising eternal return, you will not shudder. You will smile, and you will say, yes, again and again, I choose it still. This is the ultimate truth. Masculinity is not destroyed by suffering. It is destroyed by the refusal to suffer, and it is redeemed eternally by the man who dares to affirm life in all its savage beauty. The secret pleasure that once weakened you becomes powerless, and in its place rises something greater than pleasure, the joy of existence itself.